Please be seated. What do we owe the dead? Not as a philosophical question, but as a question that presses upon us now by the rubble in Gaza, by the families in Iran who do not know yet what they are going to lose, by the men and women taken into detention in our own country and who never came home. What do we owe the dead? The gospel does not answer that question in the abstract. It takes us to a valley, a real one, filled with real bones, bleached white bones scattered very dry. It is the aftermath of a battle. These are soldiers. They have names no one is saying anymore. And then God asks Ezekiel something that sounds almost cruel. Mortal, can these bones live? And Ezekiel does not answer yes. He does not say no. He says only, "O Lord God, you know." It is the only honest answer in the wreckage of human lives. Then God tells him, prophesy to the bones, not about the bones, not over the bones, to them. His task is not to give the breath that will give them life, only to speak to them. He speaks to these things that cannot hear them, yet trusts that there will be breath to do what his voice cannot do. When Jesus turns towards Judea, to Bethany, to where Lazarus has died, the disciples understand exactly what this means. Judea is where the authorities have already tried to stone him, and so going back is not a neutral act. It is Thomas who speaks, "Let us go also, that we may die with him." Thomas is not saying everything is going to be fine. He's not even saying, "I understand what Jesus is doing." He is saying, "I am bound to Jesus, and I will not let him walk into that valley alone." That is not optimism, that is a choice. It is a refusal to abandon. And so in John 11, we see that Thomas will walk toward death. And then in John 20, Thomas will refuse to accept a resurrection that hides its wounds. And it's important to note that these are not two different people. They haven't undergone a certain transformation. Thomas is not a doubter who has finally come around. He is consistent. He is a disciple who will not look away. He will not look away from death, not from the cost, not from the wounds. And so he will not accept an account of resurrection that asks him to forget what has already been destroyed. When Thomas sees the risen Christ and says, "My Lord and my God," he looks at the scars on this man the Roman Empire tried to disappear, and in those wounds he sees God. Those wounds are not just an incidental detail, they are the testimony. And so this is where the gospel becomes very uncomfortable for us, not for someone else, but for us here in this cathedral, in this city in Lent of 2026. We live in a time when the language of God is used to make the deaths of others sound meaningful, necessary, even righteous, holy, as though suffering can be sanctified by calling it order or God's will. And we too, if we are not careful, we would rather try to explain all the suffering rather than stand beside it We would rather keep that grief at a distance than be bound to the dead. We too are capable of reaching for and believing in a different kind of God, the God of power, the God of outcomes, the God who does not weep. That God is much easier to follow. That God does not ask us to go to the tomb. But the God revealed in Jesus Christ does not stand at a safe distance away and bless the wreckage around us. God stands at a tomb. God asks, where is that body laid? And then God weeps because God's friend has died. That is the difference between the gospel and its counterfeit. When Jesus arrives in Bethany, Martha meets him on the road, and she doesn't explain what happens. She just says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then Mary comes, falls at his feet, and she says the same thing. Lord, if you had been here. These are not words of unbelief, they are grief, speaking directly to God. And those words have not fallen silent. Who else is asking that question, saying that today? In Gaza, the families watching the skies at night, in Lebanon, in Iran, as they watch their children, their homes, the streets already reduced to rubble. And here too in our own land, the daughter of Luis Beltran Yanez Cruz, a 68-year-old immigrant, 30 years in this country, taken to a detention center where he had a heart attack and died. His daughter said, my soul was destroyed. I really hoped my father would leave that place, but not like this. Lord, if you had been here, we don't have to travel to hear it. Back there in our Solidarity Bay, all those faces look back at us. The men and women who have died in ICE custody, each one a name our state was content to let become a number. Lord, if you had been here, the question is whether we know we are bound to them. Jesus does not explain Lazarus' death. Instead, he just asks, where is he? And when they show him, he weeps. The tears come first before the miracle, before the command, before anyone does anything. It's been 4 days. There's a stone. There's a stench. Everyone knows what's behind that door. Resurrection does not make the death unreal. Jesus refused to pretend that the death has not been real. But then he refuses to let the tomb have the last word. Lazarus, come out. And then Lazarus walks out, still wrapped in burial cloths, still marked by what has happened to him. Nothing has been sanitized. Nothing is erased of the history. And then Jesus turns to the living, turns to us, and says, unbind him, let him go. That is your job. Ezekiel stood in the valley of dry bones, and he spoke. He refused to let silence be the last word. He did not raise the bones, and neither do we. When some of you packed those solidarity kits last Sunday after church, when your hands folded those Know Your Rights cards and tucked those whistles into those plastic bags, your hands were unbinding. Lazarus walked out of the tomb alive, but those men and women whose faces look back at us do not. And so we are left where Ezekiel was left, in a valley of bones that should not have been, asking a question we cannot answer, but being told by God to speak anyway. What do we owe the dead? All of these dead who have been killed in our name, under our flag. We owe them our refusal to accept in God's name or any other name that their suffering was part of some plan. We owe them this work of unbinding. We owe them the voice Ezekiel gave, spoken into a valley that could not hear, trusting the breath that moves where it will. The miracle is God's. The unbinding is ours.